Hello and welcome to the Nomiki show. It is Friday. I am Nomiki Konst. So centrist Democrats have to make a decision. Biden and Harris have to make a decision. Do they want to include working class Democrats and progressives, potentially even working class Republicans and of course independents in their coalition? Or do they seriously believe that they can assemble some middle of the road coalition with Steve Schmidt and other homeless Republicans who have been cut loose by Trump and the right-wing populist movement, Lincoln Project? You know what I'm talking about. So this is the dead end idea. Let's quickly show what Steve Schmidt's theory is on this.
I got to hear what's on your mind about all this.
Well, this was a monumental month in the history of the country. Democracy is fueled by faith and belief by the people in the legitimacy of the system. And our system requires both sides in the competition of ideas that's decided in elections. It requires both sides to be willing to lose an election. And if you have one side who is no longer willing to lose an election and won't represent the popular will of the American people, then what you have on American soil is an autocratic political party. And so we have some Republican senators, none of whom covered themselves with glory in any of this, with the exception of Mitt Romney over these last couple of years. At least we have 6 of them who hold on to the basic tenets of American democracy behind the lines of the autocratic movement. Okay. Right? Really a last defense, I suppose, in the Republican Party. And then all of the rest of us on the other side of that line.
So this is a dead end idea for the Republicans, but also for the Democratic Party and the country. But the Biden-Harris Democrats keep acting like that is their plan. That, what Steve Schmidt, Republican, former Bush administration official, Lincoln Project founder, scam pack, right? The Democrats keep acting like that's their plan. That's their plan to win, and that's their plan to save this country. Cedric Richmond, Biden's new head of public engagement, attended a Wall Street Journal event in which they call a CEO Council Summit. Richmond made clear that the public he plans to engage with are the CEOs and other business leaders. Richmond told the CEOs that they will always have an ear and an open door in this White House, the Biden White House, through him. Richmond told them that, and I am going to quote here, quote, "Nobody is going to persuade me that CEOs in this country are bad people." Sounds familiar. So straight from the heart of the Biden-Harris administration comes Cedric Richmond with a direct effort to link up the heart of the old corporate part of the now dead Republican Party. I get why Republicans who can't aid Trump want to do this. But where does it take Democrats? Where does it take this administration in the midst of this crisis? Well, I will tell you where. It takes us to a disaster as a country. Let's start with what Richmond said to the CEOs. He really misses the point, right? I don't really care whether CEOs are good people or bad people. I know their companies, keep doing bad things to working people, to our air and our water, to consumers, and even to their competitors. That's why we need to break up Facebook. Some other time we can have a discussion whether with Cedric Richmond and the Wall Street Journal on why these good CEOs do bad things. But right now we have a much more urgent set of challenges. This country is in the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and it is getting worse by the hour, and neither the government nor the corporate world seems to understand or care. There is a progressive insurgency building in this country because of these crises. And the Democrats' way of dealing with the insurgency is not to welcome it, to open their arms up, to recognize the crisis. Their response to the insurgency is to smear it, suppress it, demonetize it, deplatform it, not give us a seat at the table, a voice, leave it off of cable news, and pretend it doesn't exist, or just try to co-opt it. And then expect everyone who is part of that insurgency to vote for them. So that's been working for them for years now, placating to a left, but not this left, not this growing left, not in the midst of an economic crisis. So there is a big problem right now. If the Democrats do not start in the most basic ways responding to this economic disaster, putting politics aside and power aside and patronage jobs aside, if they don't recognize this crisis and deal with the urgency, if they don't welcome labor into the room, we are headed for an irreversible disaster. This isn't about being nice to progressives. It isn't about giving us a few cabinet positions. This is about embracing progressive actions to heal a deeply broken, unfair, spiraling economy. It is about ending the pandemic in a way that puts equity at the heart of public health. It is about a new order that says racial justice can no longer be deferred or police crime can no longer be covered up. Doing this will forge a realignment of center and left politics that will change our country for generations. But not doing this, it isn't a vote for some moderate status quo. I am sorry to tell you, Mr. President-elect Biden, but not pushing major change will not restore the halcyon days when senators actually spoke to each other across the aisle. No, we are way too far gone for that because there is a second insurgency growing. This one, of course, is on the radical right. If the Biden-Harris administration doesn't move quickly and convincingly to get working people back to work and protect them and close the gaps that are making so many people angry, then what we saw in 2016 and 2020 is going to grow. Crazy right-wing populism that is perfectly willing to burn this country down to save it. Listen, I'm not worried about another Trump, a more acceptable, digestible Trump. I am worried about the right-wing movement that brought him to power. And that is just waiting to swoop in like vultures and pick apart the remnants of the body politic when, of course, Biden and Harris fail to deliver. So by all means, let's have be nice to your local CEO day. But Cedric Richmond CEOs are not the future of the Democratic coalition or the movement that will stop future fascism. Progressives and our ideas, of course, are the future, and they're the solutions. And your failure to embrace us will open the way for an already growing right wing that will make the last 4 years look like a weekend at the Trump International Hotel. We have a great show for you today. It is Femme Friday. We have Astra Taylor, who joins us to discuss debt, taking on debt. And later we chat woke feminism in the cabinet with Jamie Peck and Hadas Thier. We will be right back right after the break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I'm excited to have our next guest, Astra Taylor. She is a director. She was behind the film, documentary film, What is Democracy? She is the co-founder of the Debt Collective and the co-author of Can't Pay, Won't Pay, The Case for Economic Disobedience and Debt Abolition. As I said at the top of the show, we are we are in the midst of what is likely to be Great Depression 2.0. Whether or not our lawmakers recognize it, are feeling it, are willing to put down their ice cream cones and calls with lobbyists to recognize what's happening on the ground: the eviction crisis, the debt crisis, the wage crisis, of course, the housing crisis, which goes in line with that. Astra Taylor is focused around debt, which is just very clearly shackles that are holding down not just younger people when it comes to student debt, but really anybody who is not in a class that does not have debt. Astra, you're on mute really quick. So just there you go. So welcome. Let's just talk from the start. What is the Debt Collective?
The Debt Collective is a union for debtors. So just like workers join together in a labor union, we believe that debtors should organize, unite collectively to advocate for their interests. And this is a form of coming together, a form of economic power that complements other struggles. So you can be in a labor union and also be in a debtors union. You can be unemployed and yet still have debt. You can be a student, you can be a retiree. So one of the advantages of organizing around debt, if we can call it that, is that it sticks to you no matter where you go, no matter what your circumstances are. It sticks with people to the grave and sometimes beyond. So we think that working people, poor people, can't afford to leave power on the table. Our debts are somebody else's assets. So there's power in those debts if we come together and organize.
So let's talk about how you guys are structured. Is this like a dues paying union?
Mm-hmm. That is the ambition, to be a completely member supported dues paying union. So actually we just launched in the last few months our union dues collecting page, because ultimately I believe if you're interested in political economy and you think about how money works, I think it's very important that people actually control the groups that they're part of. So I think it's really important that we have organizations that are supported by dues, just like labor unions are, as opposed to being supported by philanthropists, by grants. So that's critical for long-term sustainability. Of course, when you're organizing debtors, you're organizing people who have negative wealth. And so The thing is that all of our resources. So we offer tools so people can dispute their debts, dispute errors on their credit reports. We're about to launch an anti-eviction tool, actually a tool for disputing bail bond and immigration bond debts. Those are all free to use. You don't have to pay dues to join the Debt Collective. But I think anyone on the left should actually be really concerned about building organizations that are supported by the members and thus accountable to members.
That's right. I think that's a really important point. I'm glad that you alluded to the industrial complex, whether it's a nonprofit industrial complex or not. A lot of organizations out there are beholden to larger donations that come in, foundations,
the media,
exactly. Well, media is an obvious one. I mean, even though we are user funded, we still use platforms that are controlling our livelihoods, let's just say it that way, and our ability to get the word out. So Astra, where is the majority of the focus right now? What types of debt are you guys focusing on?
We've made our name organizing around student debt. So the Debt Collective emerged out of Occupy Wall Street. There was something called the Occupy Student Debt Campaign. It was the first time I ever heard people call for student loan cancellation, full stop. Cancel it all. It shouldn't exist. And for public college, free public college for everybody. So that's sort of our genesis. But we organize around different types of debt. We think about actually the household, because there's this lie, right, that our debts are individual. This idea that we shake hands with the creditor, we're taking out our debts, autonomously making this choice, and thus we have to uphold our end of the bargain. The truth is, and student loans are a good example of this, parents borrow for their children, right? People mortgage their houses so their kids can have a chance just of having a decent life. People have to make choices all the time. Do I pay this bill or do I feed my kids, right? Or do I help my family members? So our debts are never individual obligations. They're always bound up with each other. So student debt, though, is a powerful form of indebtedness. It's the main type of debt besides mortgages that regular people hold. And it's so clearly a policy mistake. A generation ago, people went to school for free. They didn't carry these incredible burdensome debt loads. And also 96% of it is held by the federal government, which means that the minute Joe Biden enters office, that man has power already vested by Congress. So Congress gave the authority to cancel debts back in 1965. He can eliminate it all. It's debt owed to the federal government. It's a major policy mistake. Almost everybody recognizes that, compared to the days of Occupy Wall Street when we were shouting in the park, right? People now agree there's a crisis here. Well, this is a crisis the Democrats can actually solve. If they don't, it's an abuse of power. So we're in a major contest right now over student debt, but there are other forms of debt we need to organize around: medical debt, utilities, even predatory auto loans. This is just the beginning of a bigger fight.
Let's just stick to student debt for a second, because it is getting a lot of news right now because of Senator Schumer calling for the elimination of the first $50,000 of student debt. I assume that's public debt, not whatever the federal government can provide. But you just mentioned that Congress gave the president the ability to eliminate debt in 1965. Can you tell? Have we ever done that? Is there any precedent? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there sure is. So this authority is called compromise and settlement. So when you grant an entity the ability to produce debt, it's implicit that they also have the ability to cancel it, to cease collections, right? So the Department of Education has this authority by its ability to lend. It also has the ability to compromise, to settle. This is something, though, that was not really explored until one of the co-founders of the Debt Collective, actually, Luke Herron, who's now at Yale Law School, building on work by the brilliant Eileen O'Connor, who's works at the project on predatory student lending at Harvard, started to think, well, hold on, how could this authority that is already there actually be used to address this massive and growing crisis? The fact is that compromise and settlement has been used. In fact, it was just used by Donald Trump, because Donald Trump did something that, I was actually surprised by, and that he suspended universally all student loan collections. And it actually was revealed in a press conference that his administration used compromise and settlement authority to cancel interest. So the question for the Democrats as they come into office in January is, are you going to be outdone by Donald Trump? We are facing a pandemic, an economic emergency, and the student loan suspension, people not having to send to the federal government $200, $300, $400, $2,000, $3,000 a month, which is what some people actually have to pay, is basically the difference between life and death, having a roof over your head or not for a lot of people. And allows that money.
No choice. Mm-hmm. I assume anybody who's watching the show probably is familiar with the fact that you can't go bankrupt. You can't declare bankruptcy if you default on your debt. You have it tied to you. They will seize your assets before you can pay for your food, your housing. And that's notably how Hillary Clinton thought every millennial was living in their parents' basement because they had to choose between housing or food.
And partly we have Joe Biden partly to thank for the fact that is also the case for private student loans. He was very instrumental in the 2005 bankruptcy reform. So, he could also make amends there. He owes us for his role in the student debt crisis. But you're exactly right. Student loans are very unique in that they are one of the main kinds of debts that can't be discharged in bankruptcy. You can never get rid of them. In default, the consequences of default can be incredibly severe. Your credit score, of course, tanks, which means the costs of other kinds of debt go up. You might not be able to get a job. You might not be able to rent an apartment. But in some states, they will actually take away your license. Let's say a professional license to, perhaps cut hair or to teach, therefore you lose your job. What? In some states, they take away your driver's license if you default. They garnish old people's Social Security.
This is insane. Okay, so you want someone to pay the debt down, but you're going to basically disarm them with any tools that could help them pay down that debt, getting to work.
Exactly. It's a bind. So we launched the first ever student debt strike in 2015. That's part of how we put this issue on the national agenda. We launched the student debt strike with people who had attended a predatory for-profit college, Corinthian Colleges, Inc., then students from DeVry, from the Art Institutes, other predatory for-profit colleges. began to join us. Of course, those colleges are the ones that have seen the most business since the pandemic started because they're mostly online, et cetera. And Donald Trump and his administration, basically took off what few regulations there were on them. So we launched this strike that won actually $1 billion of relief and counting to date through various legal strategies from the Obama administration and from Betsy DeVos. But there was one point in 2015 or 16 where the then governor of Florida got on Fox News and actually said to our strikers, we're going to take your driver's licenses away. So, this is just part of how it's emblematic of what a punitive system this is, and so unnecessarily punitive. Why should we be punishing people who want to get an education, who are told that this is the only way, to make more than minimum wage? Why are we garnishing the Social Security of retirees, because they can't pay their debts? So it's all got to stop. That's the debt collective's, position, is that we need to admit this is a failure, cancel all of the debt, and fix the problem at the source. And that is the logical thing to do. It's the economically rational thing to do because it will boost the economy.
Of course.
Right? All of that money will go to spend, on the things people need to survive. So it'll create jobs. Some estimates say it'll create 1 million jobs a year. That was before the pandemic. It'll create more. They say it'll actually have a bigger effect now. It'll boost GDP. This is a win-win for everybody. Yeah. And, there's a lot of misleading arguments out there about how canceling student debt is regressive. The fact is student debt is regressive because millionaires and billionaires don't take out student debt to go to college. That's what being rich is.
What's so interesting to me about this is I was trying to think, well, what's the rationale for Wall Street, Chuck Schumer, to suddenly be advocating for relieving student debt, other than smart politics, maybe not wanting to be primaried, whatever. You can look at the basic politics. But ultimately, it's in the interest of so many other financial sectors for people to be able to pay off their student debt, because clearly that's where folks' money is going to first. And if you can't pay for your rent, it means it hurts the real estate industry. If you can't pay for all the other bills, credit card bills, it hurts that industry. And so I find it really fascinating about now you have different financial sectors fighting each other, and who's going to win? Who's going to win on the chessboard?
Well, I think it's a very astute observation. I wish that the capitalist class was divided more and that they were actually coming out and arguing for this. So unfortunately, that is the logic. So I 100% think what you said is really astute, that, the sort of a building trade should be really into this idea, because there's lots of evidence from the New York Fed, for example, that high rates of indebtedness, particularly around student loan, suppress homeownership, right? So realtors, builders, right?
Come on, real estate industry.
Get on board.
You'll love to do this stuff.
Right. But, so because I think, right, that's sometimes changes made when the capitalist class fragments and different aspects of it are sort of, having a conflict. But what we're seeing, is not associations of realtors stepping up but we are seeing Goldman Sachs, for example, and also JP Morgan and their policy proposals saying, oh, sure, maybe a little bit of, moratoriums, maybe a few suspensions here, but don't cancel the debt. Because I think what they see is that there are bigger implications, because they very much were happy after 2008 when the banks got bailed out, right? When the financial sector was able to get aid. They were very happy in the spring of this year when the corporate debt market was stabilized in an unprecedented way, when the federal government bought up billions of dollars of bad corporate debt. They do not want little people to know that actually debts can be renegotiated, written off. Because, the fact is that that's what debt is. Debt is something that is negotiable, but we're in a paradigm, and we have been for a long time, where that only applies to the rich and the powerful. And so what the debt collective says is, well, what debtors need to do is organize and to wield our collective leverage so that we are able also to demand write-downs, write-offs, and the abolition of these odious debts.
So I know it's not a public university, but Columbia right now, students at YDSA are organizing a tuition strike. We've covered this on previous episodes. And it's a very courageous move, right? Columbia's tuition is extremely high. And of course, the housing in New York City is extremely expensive. And, does anybody in this process, whether it's a tuition strike or other strikes, there must be some sort of fear. What is the security that you offer folks in being parts of these strikes, because there's no necessarily clear like end goal here, and it could have a deeply horrifying, like the consequences could be horrifying for somebody's livelihood.
Yes. So two parts of that. First, I want to say thank you for lifting up the Columbia student strike. I think that it's actually an amazing development, because if we as organizers want to win things, then we have to wield economic power when and where we can. So that means that we have to engage in things like rent strikes. We have to engage in labor strikes, right? And we have to have tuition strikes as well. We have to understand political economy. We have to look at budgets, right? Figure out where we have leverage. So I think it's really critical, and I cheer them on. And it is risky, right? Labor actions are risky. There's always the risk when you are actually trying to build power of retaliation, of not winning. With the student debt strike that we launched in 2015, and actually we are launching a new iteration, a new strike to force the Biden administration to act. I'm having flashbacks here because, it's like I already spent those years under the Obama administration. Yes.
It's not like much has actually changed.
Right.
We're
going back, and basically staying to this ostensibly Democratic administration, like, here's all this power you have, you're not using, and trying to force them to use it. So one thing we do is we have focused a lot of our organizing efforts on the people who are actually already experiencing the most disastrous consequences. Something like 1.2 million people a year default on their student loans pre-pandemic, right? Of course, people have been spared that consequence by this suspension, but we'll see what happens in 2021. What that means is we're trying to politicize a condition people are already in. You feel terrible, you've defaulted, you're suffering these consequences. Well, don't have shame, have indignation. And if you band together, you can at least try to have a political voice. We also recommend that people strategically enter forms of non-payment that are available to them. So, in the student debt space, that means forms of forbearance, income-driven repayment, et cetera, things that buy time so that we can fight for a political solution to this and the abolition of these debts. So these are things, these risks are real. The fact is, though, millions and millions of people are already suffering these consequences. So I think a huge challenge for us, and one of our missions, is to reach out to those people and to say, we see where you are. There's a whole ideology here that makes you feel stigmatized, it makes you feel ashamed, it makes you feel that this is your fault. Well, guess what? It's not. And it is not something where if you just stop, to use the millennial cliche, stop eating that avocado toast or stop buying lattes, and scrimp and save, you'll get out of this. We only get out of this together. So that's why our slogan at the Debt Collective is "You are not alone," but A_LOAN, right? That there's part of this is about the way debt is actually almost a weapon that atomizes us, right? Again, it's that myth that you've agreed to this arrangement, so you made a choice, as opposed to the fact you're actually forced into it because you're underpaid at your job and you live in a society where there are no public goods and no public services. So we're not in debt because we live beyond our means. We're in debt because we're denied the means to live, the healthcare, the education, the decent housing that we are actually entitled to as human beings.
I'm so happy you brought up housing. Before we wrap up, millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, possibly even more, are facing eviction January 1st. We've yet to see any serious proposals and how many moratoriums are going to be continued in cities and states across America, and whether there's going to be any sort of assistance or response or delay from the federal government. But when I'm off air, this is what I'm talking about nonstop. I'm looking at the numbers in New York, the numbers that we do know, whether it's just small businesses or people who have been evicted legally, even under the moratorium because of previous situations. Like, we're in a really, really rough spot. And I feel like our government, when I led the top of the show saying, like, wake up, you don't know what's going on. This is like Hooverville. I can't imagine anything other than that at this point, when you have tens of millions of Americans who are going to be losing their homes and the federal government just completely being disconnected, even though 10 months has gone by. So what are you doing right now about rents, the eviction crisis, I don't know if there's a small business aspect to this too, but some of the numbers coming in are 80% of New York City small businesses didn't pay their rent in October alone.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the moral offense of this is so immense, right? I mean, it's that people at this level are facing eviction and homelessness. The Debt Collective, is working with various other groups. We are building a tool. The most concrete thing we're doing right now is that we have just finished building a tool that is for LA County, which is a huge a huge community. It's tens of millions of people, where something like 400,000 households are at imminent threat of eviction. And what this tool does is it allows people to answer their eviction notice, which is, of course, we've made incredibly difficult. People could only do it in person.
There's that aspect too. The eviction courts are backed up too. They're going to be backed up. So even if you're evicted, even if you're willing to pay, able to pay, do whatever it is to recuperate your loss, whatever. Yet the process, the lines in the courts are so long.
100%.
Sorry, I just mean it.
No, I mean, that's exactly it. And so there, then it's $500 to try to challenge your eviction. So if you have, then you'd pay your rent. So we're building technology to at least automate this process, apply for a fee waiver. We're hoping to expand this to the state of California. That's the next phase. And then to apply this to other communities. But of course, we can't just legally dispute these evictions. I mean, a lot of evictions are illegal. What we need is a movement of people occupying homes, resisting eviction, declaring strategic rent strikes, and looking ahead. I mean, not to add another dimension to this, but looking ahead to what happens after this. Because what happened after 2008 was that Wall Street landlords were able to buy up huge tracts of single family homes, right, and become these Wall Street landlords. And that is going to happen. So thinking about how we prevent that and put on at least popularize the idea that housing should be a right, that we should have, that these properties should not be owned by Wall Street investors and speculators, but should be owned by communities, that maybe our homes should not have to be assets, but actually homes that we live in, right? Instead of saying, I pray this goes up. I pray I'm able to one day buy a home so it goes up in value so I can retire, right? So there's something so broken about our system, but it's going to take people fighting back. I mean, Ilhan Omar has proposed a bill that says cancel rent. I mean, so this idea at least is out there and has some sort of legal legitimacy, but it's going to take mass organizing and a mass movement. And I think it's going to be the number one thing on people's minds, right? Which is how do I stay sheltered? And those of us who are trying to organize people really need to organize around that immediate need first and foremost, right? Because it's going to be huge.
What's so crazy about that is even, so let's flash forward. If we go down the path that we did in 2008, where big banks buy up smaller or mid-size or even large, properties from developers, they even have, if they get bailed out, they have the ability to cancel people's rent. So, there's multiple angles that this could be. I mean, of course we don't want it to go that way, but
I think you're right. Any aid to these Wall Street landlords or any aid to mortgage holders, right, to the banks needs to come with conditions.
Exactly.
And the conditions need to be don't evict your tenants, right, and provide rent relief. So again, this goes back to what happened in March of this year when we had this huge. When we had the first big, stimulus package, a recovery package, and the government rushed in to stabilize again the corporate debt market. Well, there should have been conditions on that, to keep people employed, to also not undermine unions, to have environmental sustainability. So there are so many forms of leverage. There are so many good ideas out there. And one is, yeah, exactly. When you go and rescue this sector that will probably be rescued, then make sure that part of the conditions are that, that millions of families don't end up on the streets. It shouldn't be so hard.
I mean, it's hard because there's interest in mind. It's not because they don't understand. They also don't understand. Yeah. But once the Biden administration is inaugurated, what are your plans to push back? Is there anything on the table?
Absolutely. the Debt Collective is launching a student debt strike. So this is a strategy that we did in the past under the Obama administration, working with students from predatory for-profit colleges. It won real mass debt cancellation. Again, over $1 billion, which, for a lot of people, that was getting their futures back, getting their lives back. We can absolutely win this. The conversation has changed in massive ways since we began demanding full student debt cancellation. And the heat is on the Biden administration. He's going to be facing, an obstructionist Congress, most likely, right? Are we going to let Mitch McConnell dash every solution to the crisis we're in? Even if, and sure, there's some possibility that the Democrats will take the Senate. I hope that they do. But the fact is that Biden has the authority to cancel student debt. It has enormous benefit to the society as a whole, and it's going to take a movement to make him do it. So we really invite everyone to check out debtcollective.org, to sign up. If you're in any form of non-payment, to come out and join the strike, right? I think this is so important, but politicize your condition. If you can't pay your student loans,
right,
then don't be silent about it. This is a very important moment to come out and be public about your need or your family's need or, a friend's need for debt cancellation, because I really think this is critical. This is going to happen soon, or else we're going to miss this window. So, people need to be loud and say, as the title of the Debt Collective's recent manifesto, can't pay, won't pay, right? We shouldn't have to pay these debts. They should be canceled, and it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're not alone. There's a stigma attached to it. We all know, to any debt, not just student loan debt, but the stakes are too high right now, and everybody's futures are tied to this collective action, essentially being successful. Astra Taylor, such a fascinating project. We're going to put all of your information in the info section on YouTube so people can check it out, and also on Patreon. We'd love to have you back on to see how you guys are doing in this process and how we can help out as a movement. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks. Solidarity.
Right. Solidarity. Take care. Bye. All right. We will be right back to talk about woke feminism in the Biden administration, because that's the priority right now. So we got to make sure the lean in ladies get their spot at the table. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Hey guys, this is that time. Make sure to smash that like button, get in the chat, start debating us. If you have not already joined our Friends and Family Indoctrination Program, join us at patreon.com/the Nomiki Show. We bring them in with some Democratic Party stuff, and then they leave full on Jamie Peck. So join us at patreon.com/the Nomiki Show for as low as $5 a month. Moving all the way up, you get swag, you get extra, interviews, all the stuff that you get as a patron at the different levels. You can go check it out there. All right. I am very excited to have our From Friday panel here. We have Jamie Peck, who is the producer and contributor to the Majority Report, and she is the co-host of The Antifada. And we have Hadas Thier back on. She's an author and activist. Her latest book is A People's Guide to Capitalism, an Introduction to Marxist Economics. I have to give you a little bit of a shout out. I might get in trouble for this, but my friend's daughter is 13 years old, and she is reading your book right now after seeing our interview. And I was like, oh my God, That's how you do it. That's indoctrination. All right. So I want to start off with the Biden administration picks. I mean, that's basically what we're going to talk about. But can we roll that clip from Nicole Wallace? Just so excited about the woke queen. Yes, queen feminism that has hit the Biden administration. It's going to solve everything. Let's play that clip.
I'm so excited about this team of women, this team of moms, this smart and accomplished group who will be not just speaking for the president, which is Dana Perino had that post, Dee Dee Myers had that job, but really coming up with strategies for how to communicate with the whole country. Joe Biden has said he will be a president for all Americans, even the ones who didn't vote for him. And this team will be responsible, Aisha, for crafting those messages for the president and vice president. What do you think?
Well, I think this is fantastic. And I want to thank you, Nicole, for leading with resumes, because it is exciting that we have such a diverse cabinet thus far and appointees thus far. I love that it's a bunch of women who are going to be doing the communication strategy. But it's also important to remember that these are people who have a breadth and depth of experience. Ashley Etienne, who you just put up a picture of there, actually ran point for Nancy Pelosi on the Hill for many years as her lead communications person there. And she was the person who crafted all of the impeachment narrative and language. You've got a lot of people on the team who know what they're talking about and how to connect with voters, which is the thing that's really important. And yes, I do appreciate that there are a lot of moms. There are women from all walks of life who can connect with and empathize with what we all are going through and what the conversations we just had at Thanksgiving around the kitchen table. And so to be able to communicate in a way that is connected, humanizing, and full of life experience, I think is going to be really powerful for this administration.
Let's stop it.
And we didn't mention
in a second. Kayleigh McEnany, a woman, has a child, is married, connects with a good chunk of America who believes in her ideal. All right, Jamie, I see you're just like, let's get your take on this.
I mean, first of all, I feel very honored that you would think of me as an avatar for radicalization. So thank you. I've worked really hard to create that impression about myself. So thank you. Okay, obviously this is crap, right? Like there's nothing wrong with representation. Sure. Is it better to have a diverse array of people administering society than it is to have only white men? Yeah, I guess a little bit. But if that's your only progressive politics, I'm sorry, that's just not going to cut it. You know, like I've been listening to a lot of interviews with Cornel West and Boots Riley lately, and they're very fond of saying, you know, black faces in high places doesn't necessarily translate to black liberation. And I feel the same way about female faces in high places, you know, like it doesn't matter if the people in power are what they are, right? If they're still doing austerity, if they're still doing wars of empire, and if they're not representing the average person who is very much struggling right now. So, you know, to quote a phrase from the great T.T. Bhattacharya, I don't really care if what your progressive politics amounts to is more women prison guards, more vegans in the IDF.
Exactly. And she's been on our show. Go check out her book, Feminism for the 99%. She co-authored with two other great feminists. Hadas, I feel like all we need is just to have like a little leaning in the cabinet. You know, it takes Karine Jean-Pierre to just lean in and say, okay, guys, we have to not be so heavy on the austerity, and that'll do it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. I mean, it's just, you know, it's the height of tokenism, and it's, you know, like Jamie was saying, a very low bar. I mean, the communications team, you know, hooray. And if you hear squealing in the background, that's my credentials. I also have a mother to a young child. But, you know, this is just, what are they communicating? What are the policies? You know, that's what matters. What's going to improve women's lives? You know, what's going to improve women's lives is universal health care. What's going to improve women's lives, you know, so that they don't have to worry. We don't have to worry about our health care and our child's health care if we should lose our job, like millions of people are doing. You know, stimulus spending, eviction moratoriums, women around the world not getting droned and sanctioned. This is what's going to actually matter to women's lives. And to have, like you said, women's faces in high places, that's not going to cut it. Came of age in the 90s, right? And so etched into my memory is Madeleine Albright, who was the Secretary of State under Clinton, when they asked her, is it worth it? We've heard that 500,000 Iraqi children have died because of sanctions on Iraq. And she said, yeah, I think the price is worth it. That's what we get for, femininity in, matters of defense. This is just absolutely appalling that would be our bar for what a feminist leadership would look like.
I mean, she also said there's a special place in hell for a woman who doesn't support other women, unless they're Iraqi women, of course.
Right.
What also just stands out to me, and this segment just highlighted the communications panel, but there's also, as Jamie said, there's the whole empire supporting, building, imperialistic kind of militaristic revolving door of women that have either worked directly in lobbying for drones, that have worked for, companies that are like half lobbyist, half think tank. I mean, there's a real problem here on this in the transition team. We saw in the lead up, and people were like, well, that's just a transition team, see what they come up with. And then, of course, to all of the appointees, not to mention Neera Tanden, who's running on her personal experience of being on food stamps and welfare, and then completely forgot it as soon as she went, into the administration. But what concerns me the most right now, and I think it's a great pressure point for the left, if there's any pressure point for the left right now, is in the middle of this economic crisis, when the majority of frontline workers, whether it's teachers, home health care workers, domestic workers, flight attendants, they're from unions that are made up of women, led by women, and majority women of color. And completely out of this conversation. I've barely heard the Biden administration discuss labor in this economic crisis. And to me, I think that's worse than Obama. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that era, and there was at least sort of a kind of dance that they were playing on stage. But of course, we saw how that played out. Jamie, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a labor journalist, but as far as I understand it, Joe Biden panders to the labor movement, but absolutely will not deliver. If Obama didn't do card check, I think it's safe to say that is also off the table for the Biden administration. But labor is super important. And you're saying, you mentioned pressure points, right? I think that is one eternally the area of leverage that the working class has in this country and around the world. We have the power to shut down the flow of capitalist production. And when that happens, Biden and all of his, neoliberal picks will have no choice but to pay attention, because that is ultimately what they serve, the accumulation of capital. So we really got to get back to basics, you know?
Hadas, what's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And, I think that as much as, we can talk about the makeup of the cabinet and so on, what really matters is, the policies, because the cabinet members are going to follow Biden, not the other way around. And so the question is, how do we mobilize our side, our, union members and people who can unionize to actually put pressure from the other end, because we know how much pressure Biden gets from the people that actually got him elected, the campaign contributions, the corporate cash, pharmaceutical industry, et cetera. But we need to actually mobilize our end of things. And so, like the labor movement, the fact that women at best, I think now make 81 cents to the man's dollar, but that's going to get much worse through this pandemic, because actually women are being forced out of the workforce at higher rates than men. And so that's going to put us back even further. And so if we don't organize our side, that's really what it comes down to.
And it's not just, women hold more debt. Women obviously there's finally a conversation about a lack of pay and household duties, and how, especially during the pandemic, so many women. There was a Washington Post story yesterday that talked about a woman who had to quit her job because she had to take care of her child, and she lost childcare. The childcare location, the business shut down, and so she quit her job, and so she didn't get unemployment, and so the result is now she's stealing baby formula from Walmart, and this is a huge crisis. So the burden is already much heavier for women, undocumented women of color, the most. Undocumented women, I don't even know what the numbers are right now, but I'm very curious to see how just how real this is going to get, and when they're going to actually recognize that austerity is not going to get us out of this crisis. So my question is, if women in labor were to unite, if there was some sort of, you mentioned Tiffy, and there was the women's strike that occurred, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I can't remember. But I feel like if there was a way to highlight and to really push and embarrass the Biden administration and his cabinet, I can't see any other more obvious way than through the women, the frontline women who've been abandoned in this economic crisis. And if they unified, if you had certain unions come together, whether it's have a march or a labor strike or even a press conference, frankly, to shine a light on just how ignorant they've been throughout this entire process. So, how realistic do you think that would be, Jamie?
It's certainly a long-term project, right? One thing that comes to mind is the idea of the mass strike for reproductive justice, which I know the DSA Socialist Feminist Working Group has been working on. And it's a big project. It's a long-term project, right? Because class consciousness is pretty low in this country right now. And depoliticization is a huge, huge problem among, the class of people that is going to need to rise up in order to take back power over the world and over their lives. But I think, sadly, this administration has already shown that it's fairly shame-proof, right? Like, we had the largest uprising in U.S. history against the police and police violence. And how did Joe Biden respond? He chose a prosecutor as his running mate. Like, see, it's a Black woman. That's what you guys want, right? Like, that's exactly the kind of treatment and this is before he'd even won the election. That's the exact kind of treatment that the left and that the working class can expect from him. He promised to veto Medicare for all during a pandemic when 12 million people to date have lost their health insurance. So I don't really think that this administration can be shamed. I think perhaps it'll serve a sort of a political education purpose for all the people who still maybe believe that the Democratic Party, as currently constituted, represents their interests, right? Showing the distance between the brand and, what they're actually doing. But, persuasion can only go so far, right? If everyone became a communist tomorrow, wouldn't necessarily result in communist revolution, right? We still have to build organizational power and institutional power. And, I hate to sound like a broken record, but that's the only way we're going to win. So yeah, if we need to inject feminism into the labor movement, and it's already there in large measures. And we need to unite all these struggles together, because the ways that capitalism is interlinked with patriarchy and with white supremacy, you really can't separate those out from each other.
My concern, though, is, do we have time? We keep talking about, I hear it all the time, we're in, Jamie, you and I are on Majority Report. I'm on every week. My big frustration is, well, they gave us some. It's not as bad as it could be. And what do you expect? We lost. And all we have to do is get elected, more progressives in Congress. We don't have time. We don't know the numbers yet, but my prediction is it's Great Depression 2.0. And there's not enough time to build the institutional power to push back. So what path is there in the short run that could potentially, are there any pressure points at us? Is there any hope, please?
I think that's the $1 million question for sure. And I think that's what everyone is asking, because I agree. I do think class consciousness is with us, but I think that is largely ideological and not enough organizational. I think more and more people are absolutely understanding that the system is stacked against us. I mean, it's hard to see otherwise. And I would just add to the list that you listed out before, Nomiki, about, undocumented women and all the ways that the pandemic is impacting women most. I would just add to that also and I don't know the numbers, but the women that are living in abusive situations. Right. I've been doing some interviews over the last few weeks of unemployed people from around the country, and one woman that I spoke to, who I think there's probably thousands, or if not tens of thousands, like her, is living in an abusive home along with her daughter, was saving up money to move out, to find a place for her and her daughter, and has absolutely lost all of her savings, all of her credit, has no way out, and is trapped. And that is a situation that women are facing around the country. I think ideologically, people get that. People understand that the system is stacked against us. And I think the million-dollar question is, how do we organize in time, like you're saying? And I don't know that, I don't think there are any easy answers, unfortunately. But I do think that, that something's got to give, and that there will be, in the way that this country exploded in the summer around Black Lives Matter, that I think that we're going to see more explosions like that, because there's no way around it, So I think that we are going to see more explosions. And the question for us as people on the left, as people that help to organize, is how do we, move from those flashpoints into getting people into organizations, getting people into unions, getting people into the kind of discussions with each other that will move us forward.
Jamie, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I think Hadas just said it very well. Unfortunately, there really are no shortcuts to what we're trying to do. And, I am somewhat inspired by, the rather slow but real growth of the squad. Maybe that will give us a little more space in which to operate. At the same time, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is being disciplined very heavily right now. They got owned. That's and right. There's no way around it. Like, it is a long-term project of building power. And, people have been trying really hard for many years now. And certainly I'm happy to see the DSA getting involved in all different areas, like, from housing to racial justice to immigrant justice, and really trying to put pressure on the people in power at the same time that we're building our own institutional power independently of the Democratic Party and of, capitalists in general. But yeah, in the short term, it's looking pretty bleak right now, but that doesn't mean that we should give up. That means that we should try a lot harder and not give up, because the stakes are so high right now. People are dying every single day of this disease, and people were dying already before the pandemic of malnutrition. People did not have access to food, to healthcare, to all of these things. So I hope going forward, at least some of these progressive politicians will push a more holistic vision of what health even means, because, the Biden pandemic response plan might be competent bureaucracy in the narrow vision of, disease treatment or whatever, but it does nothing to look at the health impact of housing, healthcare, all of these things, institutional racism, all of these things that we're going to need to look at if we actually want a healthy society.
I think just on a final note, Hadas, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's so strange to me is these are not idiots. The neoliberals, the neoliberals that emerged out of the mid 70s, early 70s, that was a political thought experiment, right? They really organized in response to, maybe a growing left at the time. It was a thought out theory, failed theory, but neoliberalism obviously started before that, but at least in the Democratic Party. I think what is so strange to me is clearly they have to know they're just, by every time they try to defeat the left or not give any sort of support to working people and keep leaning towards supporting capital, they're just radicalizing folks. And I don't understand how they think this is a smart path for them. So I don't know, final thoughts on us before we wrap up.
Well, I think unfortunately, they've seen the way that their policies radicalize people, but they haven't been made to pay the price for it. And until they're made to pay the price for it, they're going to keep going, because honestly, the system works for them. And even when the system is in crisis, it works for them. I mean, look at the state of the stock market. The business can boom while millions of people suffer, and those two things don't necessarily contradict each other. And so as long as they're able to get away with it, and as long as we don't make them pay a price through our power as workers, through strike actions, through our mass mobilizations, through making them pay the price politically, none of these things will change until they have to change.
Well said. Jamie Peck Hadas Thier, thank you for joining us for Fun Friday. So fun, so fast. I wish we could do this for like 3 hours. Maybe we will someday. Be well, be safe, and most likely we'll see you after the holidays.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. All right. Special shout outs to our Wise solar panels on the White House 2021. I don't even know if they'll give us that. You guys are feel free to go if you have to go. I don't know if he's going to even give us solar panels. He'll probably like build an oil rig outside the White House and be like, compromise. Tony Sparks, thank you so much for the super chat love. Wow. That is going to go a long way. Trust me, it will. And always, always, always a pleasure to have Harvey K in the live chat. He wasn't there yesterday. We missed him. I look forward to hearing his thoughts on yesterday, but I hope he was debating in the live chat today. And thank you to everybody in the live chat, especially MIDI doctors, for working those algorithms, always tirelessly working the algorithms. Huge, huge, huge thanks to Bob and Chokin for keeping the chat room troll free. And Prairie Fire Kowalski, thank you so much, says, great show. Here's some cash for the indoctrination program. Also, my first video on Prairie Fire should be out next week. Awesome. Drop that in the chat when it's out. We'd love to take a look at it. All right. To everybody else, have a wonderful weekend. Be well, be safe, wear your mask, social distance. You know the jam. We will see you on Tuesday right here at 3 p.m. Thanks.